Anytime that you start to use polymer clay directly out of the package, it needs to be conditioned. I have a quarter of a bar of Sculpey 3 here, and to condition I'm going to mash it around, squash it, roll it, pinch it, anything I can think of to make it more pliable. And eventually, when it starts to get pliable, what I want to do is roll it out into a snake. And since the object here is bead making, most beads are round, a snake is a pretty good way to start pretty much anything. Now, the trick to a good bead is to make the snake the same diameter all the way around. Now you can see this end is a little narrower than this end. So let's try again. And what I do is I push harder with my index finger and then roll that down to the other end and then come back. And this makes it narrower and longer, as you can see. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to push a little bit harder with my index finger. And as I roll, move my index finger. Not that the other 3 fingers aren't making a difference, but just by pushing that just a little bit harder on one side, I can make a nice, even roll of clay. Now that I've got my clay all rolled out into an even log, I'm going to measure it and cut it for beads. Now I'm using a particular, it's a clay measuring stick by, looks like, it's called a Marxit, and they're about 10 bucks, so they're fairly expensive. But if, as you can see, along here there are out extruded marks that are each a different width apart. So I choose a set of marks that about equals the width of my snake to make round beads, and I'll just tap that gently, and it has made marks on the clay. It doesn't show very well. Let me see. Anyways, the clay is marked, and I can take my scraper tool, and because this is not, there's only one color here, I can use my scraper tool to cut right along those marks. Now you can use a ruler, and you can use some sort of a pointed tool, maybe your bead piercer, or some toothpick, or the end of a bamboo skewer. But nonetheless, on this you can cut it, mark it and cut it. And to make round beads, I kind of squish it into a round shape to start with, and then I put it in the palm of my hand, and for a round bead I'll roll it in my hand with relatively small motions. And there we have a nice round bead. Again, mash it into a round shape, and then use small movements with my hands to get those nice round beads. Now you see those 2 beads are different sizes. One I cut a little off. The first one I added the scrap to the last bead because it was a little short, and it made it a little bit too big. And the other one I didn't cut on the line, I cut just a little shy of the line. So it turned out to be a slightly different size. Now, if I were making a full necklace, I would want graduated beads. I'd put the big one in the middle and then work my way around to where I had smaller ones up to a certain size. Sometimes you only want one big bead in the middle. Other times you want a big bead and a medium bead and smaller beads and so on and so forth. But a necklace works out pretty good when you graduate them. Now, using this same size patch, this time I want to make an oval. Now, first I get it to be the round, and then I make bigger movements, and I use more the palm of my hand. Well, of course, usually it works quite well, but the bigger movements will give you a little oval bead. You can also buy little whoop-de-doo devices that, if you make the snake the right size and you put it in this little plastic device and you rub the plastic device back and forth on top of itself, you can get oval beads, and they're more likely to be the same size as each other. Now you can see I can make these really football-y with pointed ends like this one, or I can squash it just a little bit and round those ends off. So there we have our round and oval beads. Okay, here we are again. If when we're slicing our roll into beads, and we just want disc beads, if we use our tissue blade, we can slice nice little disc beads. And you want to be careful not to get these too thin, because if you get them too thin, they're going to be delicate and may break. But as long as you keep them fairly thick, and these are about 1/8 of an inch. Now what I'm going to do is show you how to make a marble bead at this point. And so I'm going to take a section of 2 colors and put the rest of the stuff away. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist them together. I'll move this tissue cutter out of the way here. And if you can't find tissue cutters at your craft store, you can go to your wallpaper department in a good box store, and they sell wallpaper scrapers that are about 4 or 5 inches long, or wide I should say, and you can get replacement blades for those. And they make pretty good sharp blades for the clay. Now here I've got what looks like a candy cane. I'm going to slice this. I'm using a tissue, I'm using the blade just because you can see what you got behind. If you like what you see, you're good. If you don't, cut it in half, twist it again. We're looking for a marble pattern. So I'll roll it out again. This time I'm going to cut it in thirds. And you see we're getting a little bit better marbly pattern. And as I put it together, I try to change the orientation on it so they aren't all in the same orientation. And then I'm going to squish them together again. Roll it out a little bit. And then twist again. And see if I like that. Oh, I'm going to go one more time. I think the stripes are too wide and I want them closer together. So again, I'm going to try thirds. And we're getting some interesting stuff inside. And remember, these beads, if we make round beads, will show some of the outside and some of the inside. If you're making the flat beads, you'll see mostly the pattern from the inside. I'm going to make it into a snake, and I'm going to twist it one last time. And then roll it out. And that looks pretty good. It's a pretty interesting pattern as we look around there. Not a whole lot. We could do it one more time, but I'm just going to stop at this point. Now I'm going to mark this off for beads. And again, I'm going to use the marks about the same diameter as my clay is, just because that makes easier round beads. And because there's two colors here, I'm going to continue to use my blade to cut rather than my scraper, because the scraper pushes through instead of cuts through, and it will squash the colors together and you'll lose any of the pattern that you have. Now, it doesn't make so much difference for these nice little marble beads, but it will make a huge difference when you get down to making patterned canes. And this, we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to make them round, and then we're going to pierce them. Little lack of foresight there. I didn't have my piercing tool handy where I could reach it. So anyways, I have a special awl that came with the first package or kit that I got from Sculpey. I got 32 or 24 different colors and some tools, and this has been really, really handy. You could use any sort of a pointed awl. A lot of the clay, polymer clay workers put a darning needle into a wad of clay and then bake it, and they have their own piercer. So whatever works. If it has a point, it works better than something flat like a wire. But any way you want to do it will work. Now, you push gently, and I hold it excuse me, between my fingers like this to kind of prevent the clay from deforming. And I push and twirl at the same time. We want to go through the clay, not push it in, because if you don't push and twirl, it'll dimple something fierce. Now, I'm not twirling, and you see how you get quite a dimple? And it's just easier to do the twirling. And as I pierce these, I'm going to put them on a heavy-duty florist wire. You could use bamboo skewers to do your piercing and hold your beads. If you had some bigger beads, or if you wanted to use a thicker stringing material, like satin rat tail makes a nice easy thing to string your beads. And it always works better if you push halfway through from one side and then from the other side. If you don't, the clay will push out and you'll have little ragged edges of clay on the far side, and that's no fun. Now I'm going to take a quick break while I finish piercing these, and then we'll get back together. Okay, we're back, and I have all my beads on my florist wire, and I've kind of spaced them evenly. What I'm going to do is I want to flatten these, and they won't be sharp and flat like the ones that we made earlier, but they'll be kind of round and flat. Now you can just squash each one individually, but you want to be sure it's on something when you squash it, so you'll still have a good hole in the middle. Now I've come up with this little whoop-de-doo device. These are pieces of foam board, or I don't know what you want to call it, a foam core sometimes. And you buy these in your craft or dime or drugstores or whatever. And I've got 2 strips here. And the reason I put the 2 strips out between these is so all my beads will be the same thickness. If I squash them individually, or I don't use some sort of measuring device like this, I have some really skinny beads and some fat beads, and it really doesn't work too well for me. And then I put another piece of this foam board down, and I just push. Now you noticed I make sure I cover completely all the beads that it will fit. And then they have some nice flat beads. Now this one I'm going to have to wiggle around a little bit. I can only do 4. I can't get 5 in here. So I'll just push them down. And then I'll move this back over here and squash it down. And then I'll take my foam core and put it away. And I'll gently move these off my cutting mat. It's just sticking just a little bit. I should have cleaned my cutting mat a little better. But we get these nice flat beads with the round edges. Now if you happen to have some rubber stamps and some really neat rubber stamps that are tiny like this, you could come in and ink your stamps and press a pattern into each of these beads and then bake it. I don't know as I would use a marble to do that. I would probably use a plain color, but you can just stamp right through and you're all done. This time we're going to be making what I call bicone beads. It's like 2 circular pyramids stuck on top of each other, and what people call lentil beads because they kind of look like lentil beans. And for this you'll need a piece of acrylic, probably would be best, or a small piece of glass. And you notice I've taped around the edges of this piece of glass, which came out of a small picture frame, so I don't cut myself. You can use something opaque if you want, but for making swirly beads I like to see when they're actually going to be where they're actually swirled. So anyways, I'm going to start out, and I'm kind of, if I can do this so you can actually see what I'm doing, kind of keep my fingers down so I keep this parallel to the surface. And I'm going to make big circles. Now here you can see that this is starting to be the shape that we want. And just keep, now I probably messed it up by showing you in the middle. But keep going. Keep making big circles. The bigger the circle, the longer the bead will be. The shorter the circle, the shorter the bead will be. And here we go. This is a bicone bead. Okay, I'm going to take these beads that I've made, they're both the same size, and I'm going to cut them into quarters. hopefully I can get my quarters even and not have one side bigger than the other. And I'm going to mix the dark and the light and the dark and the light together to where I have kind of a checkerboard. And I'm going to squash these. We don't want any air in the middle. I don't want to ruin my round shape or mess up the point of the checkerboard. But we do have to get that air out. Now I want to make sure that this checkerboard end is pointing up. And I'm going to put the glass on top of it. I'm going to use both hands, fingers and thumb at each corner. And I'm going to try and hold on to the glass so the glass stays parallel to my tabletop. And then I'm going to move around in circles. And what I'm trying to do is swirl the two colors together. Sometimes I can get a faster swirl if I make bigger circles. And other times, no matter what I do, it doesn't want to swirl very fast. This is very, very difficult to get right every time. It's not a hard technique, but sometimes things don't go just as you plan. I'm beginning to get a nice swirl on this. And here we have, you can see there's a swirl at both ends of this. And we'll try one more time. And this is another thing. The more you try it, practice makes perfect. And you'll get a better swirl if you can keep the point of that checkerboard at the point of the bicone bead when you're making it. Does it always happen that way? Not always. And I have to say that the desktop I'm working on today is not a nice flat desktop. There's some bumps and swirls in it, so it's giving me a little bit of a hassle. Now when I want to make a lentil bead, now notice I've been making fairly large circles. I make the circles a little smaller and I'm going to push just a little bit harder. And we get a nice flat lentil bead with a swirl. Now I can take these swirly bicones and do the same thing. I want to make sure that the point is up and that I'm going in the same direction I did last time. Otherwise I'll undo my swirl. I learned that the hard way. And just make smaller circles and push them together. Push down just a little bit, make smaller circles, and boom. You've got all these lovely, swirly lentil beads. Thanks. Now we're going to pierce some holes in the lentil beads. And they're a little more delicate just because they're thinner. So you want to start right on the edge. Again, push and twirl about halfway through, and then come over to the opposite side on the edge and push and twirl until your piercer comes out the other end. Now, depending on how you're going to string these, now these will lay flat against your skin with approximately the same amount on the top and the bottom. If you were to pierce a little higher up in the bead, say maybe 1/3 of the way down instead of half the way down. Then they will lay on your skin, showing the swirl, but most of the bead would be underneath whatever you're stringing them on. You could also choose an interesting pattern and pierce from front to back, at least 1/4 of the way in, if not 1/3 of the way in. And these would lay against your skin like this, or they could be used as earrings, which would then show the swirl to the front of your face. And let's see, if we're going to make earrings, we might as well get something that's very similar there. Or as similar as we can get it. That's the nice thing about making your own beads. No two are exactly alike. They are handmade and they're going to look like they're handmade. And that's the beauty of them. Anybody can tell that they are indeed not mass-produced. And I think that's a good thing. And to be honest, if you look real closely at your beads after they're baked, you can see your fingerprints in them unless you buff your fingerprints out. And there's not much more than that you can make to put your identity on them, is to use your fingerprints. But anymore, I generally buff or polish my fingerprints out. I think they look a little bit better with a smooth surface. And the nice thing about these polymer clay beads is that they will, with time, lay against your skin and develop their own patina, even if you don't put anything on to make them super shiny. And the more you rub them, the more skin oils that they pick up, and the smoother they get, and the nicer they get. So they age beautifully. Now, these need to be baked, and I'm using Sculpey 3 here, and the manufacturer recommends they be baked about 365 degrees in your home oven, and for each 1/4 inch you will bake for 20 minutes. Now, none of these beads are actually 1/4 inch thick. I'd probably put these in, and I would lay them in the top of a shoebox or on a baking sheet with sides. Now, you can buy specific baking tins from the craft stores, but you could also just use a shoebox and put a little notch and just have them hanging on the sides of the shoebox like this. Now, these flat beads, I'd probably bake at about 15 minutes, and then I'd check them. And I turn the oven off and I let them cool in the oven, so they'll actually get about 20 minutes baking time. The same thing with these. They're a little bit thinner, so they might cook or they might cure a little bit faster. But I'd still have them between 15 and 20 minutes. I definitely check them at 10, because some of these light colors, if they're baking too much, if they get too much heat too soon, or if they're overdone, they can turn kind of a brownish color. So you'd see a tan in here rather than this nice pearly pink. But I'd still put them on the edge of something so they aren't touching the pan. I discovered early on that if you lay them in the pan, you'll have one shiny side from the metal and touching the clay, and one dull side. So from then on, I have hung them on something. Now you could take heavy paper and put it into accordion folds and put each of these beads in the down fold of the accordion, and that works pretty good too. But nonetheless, I hope you've enjoyed these 3 simple beads. We've made disc beads like this. We've made cylinder disc beads with sharp edges. We've made round beads. We've made oval beads. We've made the bicones, and we have made the lentils. So have fun with your own clay.